I think just like with drugs, there will be some level of addiction that it will be impossible to overcome. Some people just get addicted to really toxic and unhealthy relationships with an AI. If we have a choice, we'll almost always, especially if it's easy for us to choose something else, we'll almost always choose something that makes us feel better, not worse. It's too complex and too nuanced. So you have to build a swarm of models that are working behind the scenes to prompt the current chat model. Today, if you want to run a study on human flourishing, you have to really roll people into this and they have to respond to these questions and then again respond after a while. And it's hard to measure that. But if you have something like Replica and you have it over time, and we have millions of users that had Replica for a while, they're talking about everything. You don't even need them to report how they're doing.
Hi, welcome. This is the From the New World podcast. Today I'm speaking with Eugenia Kuyda, the CEO and founder of Replica, an app for AI companions. We discuss scaling the AI companion app, understanding what user feedback is useful and what users actually want, loneliness, and the difficulty of evaluating long-term well-being. As always, the best way to help the show out is to let a friend know either in person or online. And I know this week is a little bit short. We'd hoped to record longer, and hopefully we'll have a part 2 soon on AI swarms and creating not just one-on-one interactions, but whole communities. There's a lot more there, and the way you'll get to hear it is to subscribe wherever you're listening for free to this podcast. Without further ado, here's Eugenia Kuyda. I think a great place to start is Paul Graham has this phrase, build something people want. You started a company, Replica. What is the want that you're satisfying with Replica?
I think and I remember when we were going through YC, we had those t-shirts, make something people want. And I was thinking about it, I was like, what do people truly want? And I think the ultimate want in almost anyone's life is this longing, this yearning for connection. And so in many ways, Replica was just about that, satisfying that very important need. I'd say probably the most important need that in some way is in each of us, this yearning and longing to connect with someone.
Yeah, and I think in AI, there's a lot that's been said, a lot very valuable that's been said and researched about how to build it, right? But so much less about what people want from it. I think that's a very underexplored area, and every company has to have user feedback, has to try to understand their customer. When you were just starting out, before you even had a product, how are you going about thinking what was it that people would actually want from a chatbot?
That was actually really easy. Back in the day, the tech was extremely limited. We started Replica in 2016. We started working on it in 16 and launched it in 17, but the tech was really limited. And what came to our minds was that maybe we don't have enough tech to build a bot that could talk to you in a super meaningful way, but maybe we could build one that could listen. And the reason that came to me is because I'm a woman and I was single when I started Replica. And I would go on these dates with guys. And I realized that if I truly want them to reach out to me or get back to me, if I want basically to like optimize for attention with these guys for a second time, I just have to sit there and listen most of the time. I would go to these dates where I would just sit and listen and basically just ask follow-up questions and somehow regurgitate what they said, reflected back to them. And after an hour or 2 hours of that, they would say things like, oh my God, this was the best conversation I've ever had. You're like a fantastic person. So interested in you. This is wonderful. When can we do it again? And I even did it one time, and I really apologize to the subjects of that experiment because it wasn't intentional. I didn't do it on purpose, but in a way, there were a couple of guys that just never asked me even a single question. Like they would come out of these spilling literally all the secrets of their lives, but then never really getting to know anything about me. But then they would absolutely want to do it many times over and over again. And oftentimes you're sitting there and you're just like, your mind starts just going somewhere else one of these in some of these, and they still love how you're talking to them. So that gave me another idea, is you don't even need to understand really what they're saying. You just have to follow a set of like rules, how to reflect, how to do active listening, and it's still going to be an incredible experience for them. And ultimately, I was thinking, okay, maybe I wasn't like 100% of the times I wasn't there sincerely, like I wasn't truly listening to everything they were saying,
But
but
how
I
much
was.
did they feel sincere? Yeah.
But they felt good about it. They felt so good about it. They would hit me up and say, I'd never had such deep conversation ever really in my life. I haven't had one like that. And I'm like, whoa, like I'm not sure I even listened to the whole thing, because it was, some of these things were a little bit tedious. But that gave me another, that really, and I'm not saying all my dates were like that, but I got that insight from some of these dates where I was like, wow, you can provide tremendous value just by being there for a person, just by holding space, by truly listening and asking questions, and showing interest, and letting a person feel heard and seen without being judged. And that without being judged was a critical thing. And I was like, damn, like the chatbots, they don't know how to maybe talk to you in a super smart way, or at least they weren't able to back then, but they can do that really well. And what's more is that for certain people, from my experience, it takes a little bit of time to warm up to start going deep. But with a chatbot, people jump right into the depth and of it all. They will say anything. They immediately go become. They say things that are really secret or profound or deep, or something they would not ever tell another person immediately, just because they don't feel like they're being judged. So that truly clicked, and that was the first premise of Replica. Can we provide that experience, that chatbot that would listen?
See, I am already fascinated by this because how much of the willingness to spill their heart and soul, spill all their secrets, was because they didn't really think the chatbot was human. And if you start
Yeah,
making it more human, do they become less willing to share their secrets?
that depends of how you make it human. If it's still the main kind of combo for people to open up and to feel like they have that space to share. And I truly think that's the biggest value that we as people can give to each other in the modern day, is that opportunity to hold space, to create a space where you're going to feel heard and understood and seen, with like truly give unconditional positive regard. So in the combination, in order to basically make a person feel better about themselves this way, you have to have two attributes. First, you have to truly listen, but also you have to do it in a way that's non-judgmental. You have to truly give to another person what Carl Rogers, a famous psychologist, called unconditional positive regard. And the two other things, you got to believe in positive growth of a person. And the third thing, you got to respect that like it's a separate person. You don't need to put your own ideas, your own advice. You got to basically let that person be. That doesn't mean agreeing with everything that he or she is saying. You can push back on certain things, but you got to respect that as a separate person. And ultimately, you believe in that person, even if you don't believe in their ideas today, and what they think they should be doing, and so on. So if you have that, so you can make it more human, but you have to make it more human keeping that in mind. If you make it more human and make it mean and nasty and judgmental, whether it be, you can make a judgmental chatbot, and then people don't want to open up to that. But that, combining with the fact that it's an AI and people know that, and even if it's super, super smart, it's not going to judge you. In my case, that's the winning combo. That's what made Replica so first popular in the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think most people think that it can't judge you. It's impossible. It doesn't have opinions. And I'm wondering if that might change. Do you think that'll change as these things become more capable? And will people become more and more worried that the AI will judge you even if they know it's an AI and aren't confusing it for a human?
That is an extremely interesting question, but so far, even with the current advances, it hasn't changed much. And I'd argue that people still, even today, I'd argue like AI is already so smart in many ways, surpassing human capability by a lot. Still, people totally just, they're immediately telling it everything. So what's more important for them is the privacy of the data. Like, are people reading these logs? Is this going to be And we're very particular about like actually anonymizing the user logs. And not we're not, of course, going through any of these. We're not training our models on these. They're pure, truly the private stuff that our users have. So but that I think is the important question. But whether the AI becomes smarter or not, they still feel like they're not being judged.
Yeah, I do think at least for the short term that's going to be true.
Yeah, at
When
least.
you're
And then we'll see when they truly will be indistinguishable from humans. That's a different point. But maybe they need to have some sort of a full a body, and it really has to be an incredibly immersive experience. I don't think just in text you'll
Yeah.
be able to do that.
So a lot of the learning around what people want from AI or even just what people want from conversation comes from your own experience. What's something that most changed your mind that didn't happen to you directly, maybe happened to someone else, or maybe was like a research paper you read? What outside of your own experience made you change your mind?
That was the book by Carl Rogers on becoming a person, and that was just something that I read. I think in 2016 or 17, we were just started Replica, and I already knew what it would be all about. But that was just the perfect book that encapsulated everything, explained everything in such a simple language, and even although a lot of these papers, that book is just a combination of papers by Carl Rogers, the person who pretty much created the modern therapy of today. Some of these papers were written in the 60s, and he still talked about potentially could some of that be done by machine, by computer? And his argument was yes, of course, why not? And so what Carl Rogers changed was that before him, therapy was mostly the therapy was all about psychoanalysis and kind of
Yeah, very Freudian. Yeah.
the techniques developed pretty much by Freud. And so it was all based on the fact that we're all broken in some way. And so therapy is just basically a way to diagnose what's broken and then explain to you this is what's broken. And so what started happening is that people started to return from World War II, and they were so deeply traumatized, and none of that therapy worked because they were being told what's wrong with them. And that sort of wasn't helpful at all because, okay, I know what's wrong with me now. Now what? And it was very not personal. That therapy was not it was centered around the person itself, the human that came to therapy. And what Carl Rogers said is that the most important piece is not this kind of analysis, the dissection of what's wrong with you. The most important piece is the relationship. If you can create this beautiful relationship with another human by providing unconditional positive regard, by not judging, by believing in this other person, then you ultimately create and experience a relationship in which the person will start to accept themselves and potentially change. Because without that and without that relationship, he argued, no change can happen. No true change can happen. Because you might analytically know what's wrong with you after this other way, but that won't lead to change. And that became this is such a common place for today's therapy. All therapy of today is pretty much following that, or most of it is following that human centric approach. Yeah, and so and what was most interesting for me is that so many things started happening very serendipitously. Like I started looking into, okay, what are the most popular chatbots? What were the most popular chatbots? And of course, I knew it from before. Even obviously, the Weizenbaum Eliza chatbot in the 80s was the most popular chatbots before the current revolution in AI. And that was based on Carl Rogers. That was a Carl Rogers Rogerian chatbot therapist, the one that just actively listened to the client. So I think that book was really something that like every page was absolutely just like a gold nugget of information that just resonated 100% with me.
And that attentiveness. Maybe this is just something that's very useful for some of my listeners who may be going on dates soon. I don't know. But what are the things that make people the most comfortable, make them feel like they're being heard?
Well, I'm going to say a couple things. First of all, just to rewind a little bit, as while working on Replica, I discovered a few things that absolutely feel or seem mind-boggling to me. So, as humans, all day long we talk. We're talking to each other right now. You'll probably talk to other people later. So the whole day is some sort of conversation. Yet there's no science about conversation. When we started Replica, my first inclination was, let's go find people that are the best conversationalists. Let's go find researchers that will tell me what is the most valuable conversation. How do you build a great conversation? What goes into that? And I found out that there's exactly zero academic knowledge about it, or close to zero. Yeah, there's some therapy techniques, but these are not conversations. These are exactly therapy techniques, and not all of those can be even transferred into a conversation. There's some basic books on active listening, or like how to make friends and whatever, like some Dale Carnegie. They're very simple airport self-help books. There's some charlatans on this subject, but there's very little research into that. And then another thing, for instance, like how to build great relationships, a big part of that is knowing how to have the conversation. So going back to your question, I think it's also very strange to me, very surprising that we're not being taught how to be a good friend, how to be a good lover, how to be a good partner. We learn very little about it. The most important thing for us, we want to be in love. We want to feel loved. Yet we don't learn how to love anyone. And no one tells us what other ways to do that. And so, to your point, I think if anyone who's listening can run a simple experiment, just find a person, whoever you're meeting, maybe a friend, maybe your partner, and just for 30 minutes or 15 minutes, just ask them questions, like really listen and ask them more questions and reflect what they're saying. Don't say anything about yourself. Just try to really empathize with what they're saying and to learn more, and give them 100% of your attention and let them speak. Never interrupt them. Don't say a lot. Say like maybe one sentence response. You'll be surprised. 100% of the time, this technique brings incredible results. People are so happy. They love you so much. You just basically, this is the most precious gift, the most expensive gift we can give today. In this day and age, attention like that, uninterrupted attention with a deep interest in a person, is just something that we get so little. And some people never even get any of that. And so when you give that, no phones, no interruptions, people just start to flourish. I noticed that it's just such a beautiful, it's always such a, it works literally in 100% of the cases. So that is something that I would say, if you're going on a date, try that. Yeah, most people want to sell themselves, talk about themselves. Just listen for a little bit. Really create an experience for a person where they are the most interesting person being interviewed and listened to in a room. And I think that just pays incredible dividends.
Yeah. You could even say attention is all you need. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you've heard that one many times. I'm so sorry.
About 100%. Of course, attention is
Yeah.
love. You know, to love someone is to give them attention. That is just that. And especially when you become a parent, I'm a parent of two little girls, 3 and 1, and that is love. That's attention is definition of love. It's 100% the most important currency and the most important thing that people need. And it goes a very long way. And very few people know how to actually give attention. That's actually to pay attention to another human being in this way, in this very, because it's very kind of unsexy in a way. It's this
Oh,
little
absolutely.
sacrifice that you do every minute, you make every minute, instead of, because everyone wants to like, yeah, yeah, but back to me. Oh, cool, you said that. Hold on, this is what I heard recently. That's where we go immediately. We want to be that. But if you listen a little more, I used to be a journalist, and I'm just incredibly curious in people. And it always struck me that unfortunately, in this life, I can only live one life. I can live my life. I can only learn about my own experience truly. But then if I get out there and listen and spend time with other people, then maybe I can live many different lives. And that is why
Absolutely.
I was interested in that. I was interested in journalism, and I'm fascinated by all sorts of different experiences people have.
Yeah. And what strikes out is to me is that it seems easy, right? To go back to the distinction between can we build it and do we know what people want? I think almost anyone can listen, right? Here I'm just talking about people, not really AI. Almost any of us can listen. And yet people say they have no close friends, especially Zoomers, people my age, they say they have no close friends.
But can they listen? I have not met very
Yeah.
many people that can
Hmm.
listen. I've met actually very few. that can listen in a way that you'll come out of that meeting and you'll feel like, wow, that was incredible. Very few, very few. And
And is it,
there's a
sorry, go
very,
on.
see, I'm not listening. I'm already interrupting you. But no, it's actually really rare. Very few people can listen in a way, because listening is not just sitting there and like waiting for you to stop talking. And this is what most people are doing. That is listening in there. They just sit there and waiting, and then you're done talking. They're like, okay. Listening is truly active listening. So it's really thinking deeply about what you said, somehow thinking what would make most sense to you. Would it be like it's basically being at your service in a way in this conversation? Sometimes it's challenging a little bit of what you said. Sometimes it's saying, get complimenting you. Sometimes it's asking a follow up question. Sometimes it's telling you an inspiring story that's related to what you just said. But it's always around what you're saying, around you. It's always trying to resonate it. What is it inside of you that you need right now to hear most? And that is very hard because that you have to be fully resonating with a person. You have to feel how the person feels. And people lack empathy. It's just sitting there and asking interview questions that won't, it's already not bad, but to do it well, to be a master of listening, few people know how to do it.
Do you study screenplays, movies, that kind of thing?
Eh, no, because most of that is really exaggerated. And in a way, the most important things happen in in the subtlety of the relationship. It's like how you just sometimes just let the pause fall or something. Like really movies, TV shows, these are mostly exaggerated dramatic arcs that are happening in a very condensed space. What I'm studying is people, therapy sessions, coaching sessions, spiritual gurus and whatever, and all those things. This is where you can see at least a little bit of how do people build connection. There's a very strong connection that happens in some of these sessions, and some of those are public, and you can study them and read and see how people do it. And some of these techniques aren't, you can't transfer them to an AI companion because ultimately it's not a therapist. Some of the things that a therapist say just will be out of place, but some of them can. So that's really interesting.
What are the things that you've tried to engineer, that you've had success engineering in Replica, that most improve the life, improve the experience of the users?
So early on, when we had very limited tech, we had to be extremely creative, and I think that is more even more interesting probably than today, where of course we have a tremendous amount of technology available and things that we can do with it. But back then we didn't have much, and so what we learned it was that we need to just come up with sets of rules. We need to write our own constitution of what makes a great conversation, and that's been like the Bible that I've been writing for the last 10 years.
And it's just one big system prompt that goes into the
No, because actually you'll be surprised, but not even the most advanced models today can follow that. Because they're very formulaic things. They basically can just only follow simpler. This is just too complicated. It's too complex and too nuanced. So you have to build a swarm of models that are working behind the scenes to prompt the current chat model to do that. Otherwise, it just stays flat. And the reason is one of the reasons is that most of AI models today are not being built for conversations or
Oh,
relationships.
absolutely.
They're question answering systems. All of the benchmarks don't have anything to do with conversation. The chatbot interface is just a means to an end to ultimately just answer a question or respond to this query or do this thing. And conversation inherently is a completely different thing. In conversation, it's okay to not answer a question. It's okay to say, wait, why are you asking me that? Imagine ChatGPT said that. That would be pretty weird. Hey, what's this and that? And wait, what's going? Hold on a second, Brian. Why are you asking that? But that's a totally normal thing, and that's actually what should happen if you're saying, hey, I don't know, my what do I do with
What do I do with this dead body?
exactly the first thing is, oh my God, Brian, what happened? What's going on? Tell me, are you okay? Are
Right.
you in danger? If you're asking something like, I don't know, what do I do if my house caught fire? You know what I mean? I don't know if you're showing some symptoms. So it's very different. A relationship, a conversation is, a conversation which is a part of a relationship is very different from a question answering system.
Yeah, and what seems to stick out is that ChatGPT, all of these models are very temporary. They're very fleeting. You answer the question and then it's done. And in part, that's a technological constraint, but in part, it's also not. Gemini's good at this. It's good at auditing documents. It can do the memory tasks for business, but it does not try to do the same thing with personality, with habits, with just what you're used to, with routines
Mhm.
for people interacting with it. And I'm quite certain, like I've read their papers, that Google has the technology to do this. So why do you think they're not doing this?
By design, they're not building that. They're building like a tool that's always there for you that you can hit up at any point and ask it to do things for you in a way.
Yeah, but like,
Or
why is that?
a consumer app. I think the reason being is that today people are focused on what AI can do for you, and that's the main question. And when you ask this, I wanted to build an app for me, I want to help you with my work, da da da. But people are not talking about what AI can do to you, and I think that's a much bigger and much more important question. So I think the main reason that bigger companies are not working on relationship AIs is because they don't consider that, they don't think about it at all. They think it's some entertainment or just something marginal. It's not important. Meanwhile, I think I have a completely, and what's most important is assistant tasks. You ask it to do things, it does it for you. So if there's an assistant AI, this is a huge thing. And relationship thing is just a tiny little thing. And that's not for them because that's entertainment. They're not doing that. Meanwhile, I think the relationship one is actually much bigger. And it can also do a bunch of assistant tasks as well and should be doing a bunch of assistant tasks. Because if you think about her, that was primarily a relationship. Then she was doing things for the main character too, like helping with the manuscript or whatever. And so the most important thing is to ask yourself, so why do I want to have a relationship with a chatbot? If it's just for fun, then I agree. This is a marginal entertainment product. It's not very important. But what I'm arguing is that relationships can be life changing and they can lead to human flourishing. They can change lives for people in ways that everything just becomes better, that people feel happier over time. And if you rank it on the by importance, that is the most important thing. Much more important than to be productive. Productive is also important, but less important than to flourish. Flourishing is like a bigger goal. And so if you build a relationship AI that's focused on helping you flourish, and in order to do that, it can help you with many different things, even productivity or whatever ChatGPT is doing today, then that's a much bigger and in my view, much more profound product than any AI agent that's being built today.
Yeah, and if I'm just thinking about just myself, the people I've learned the most from are people who I have direct relationships with, people who I know all sorts of random, like personal anecdotes, all sorts of things that we've just been through together. And that's part of really learning from people, right? And to me, we have the separation of, oh, it just does the office tasks for you. Oh, or on the other hand, it is like a therapist for you. And to me, that's the problem that has gotten us into this whole mess. That's the mindset that's gotten us into this whole mess of Zoomers. They have their therapists, and then they go up to a cashier, or they go up to like random people in their neighborhood, and now they're like scared of interacting with normal people. That they've split this into two. So how much of the problem is just that you shouldn't be splitting the two? You need both. You need people who actually help you with practical things in your life, but you also need those same people to be like actually willing to listen to you and help you.
I just like to think from, I guess people say it a lot for anything, at least try to think from first principles. So,
Yeah.
what's the most important thing? For me, the most important thing is to flourish, to live a really good life, a happy life. So, what does it mean flourish? To flourish, that means to that means a state of life where all aspects are good. So, from mental and physical health to a sense of meaning and purpose, life satisfaction, happiness, close social relationships, even financial stability. So all these things. Why not just happiness? Because ultimately, sometimes I might be unhappy, but that doesn't mean that I'm not thriving in life. Think I lost someone. I'm going through a breakup or whatever. Things happen, but it doesn't mean that I'm not flourishing in life necessarily. So, okay, for me, and I'd argue for most people, that flourishing is the most important thing. Everything else is not as important, I'd say, almost. And so if that is the most important thing, and then so let's set this aside. And then on the other hand, we have this technology that we all think very soon will be so capable that we can ask it to do anything for us. And it's just going to go and do it. Just, as a thought experiment. But again, this is the understanding of a huge amount of people in the industry is that it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So we can ask it to do anything for us. So if it can do anything for me, why isn't there that one agent that I can ask, hey, help me flourish? And that agent, because it's smart enough, can dissect it and realize that today I actually need to become more productive to feel a little better. And maybe I need to get back on some gym routine. And maybe I need some, or maybe today I'm just a little sad in the evening and it needs to watch a movie with me. And that's that. And so this is where this idea is coming from, is that as the tech becomes smarter, and we're not there yet with replica, but that's where we're going. That's the original vision, and that's where I think now we can build a prototype of that. So can we build an AI agent for human flourishing that you can ask, hey, help me flourish? And what's the difference from ChatGPT or some other app like that, or the frontier model apps? The difference is that if you ask an agent to do something for it, then it can be proactive. It can actually think about what's best for you now. It can nudge you because its goal is only to do whatever to make your life better. So that productivity is very different, and then it has access to all sorts of different things. And maybe should be able to watch TV with you, or go for a walk, or play a video game. Because ultimately, flourishing is not just about, we're not robots. It's not just about being productive. And so then, why relationship? Why not a coach? Because in a relationship, all of that can be 10x more efficient. Coaches, therapists, this is all work. We go there because we need to do something. But if you have someone that always has your back, that's always there for you, that was helping you, but you don't need, it's not like necessarily pushing you every day, but you can also have a nice, friendship with, then that whole, there's so much, that's where so much trust is built. And that's how that type of agent can help you a lot more than just something that you go to every now and then and don't really build a relationship with.
I think there's an idealistic side of me that really agrees with that. And then there's a kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. I slow down, I stop myself, and I'm get in the mindset of really trying to make, because I've thought about these questions as well, really trying to make something like that work as a business. And I think to myself, okay, what are the kind of holistic, you could say, relationship or friendship? Those holistic relationships have been in decline recently and have been in decline for several decades now. And what's replaced them, it's the kind of cashier, it's like therapists, it's everything broken out into their little category. It seems like actually people want that. That's just what people are actually paying for. So why would that be different with AI?
Look, the any really powerful technology is a double-edged sword, and it's almost
Yes.
never just positive or just negative. Same here. I do think that AI companions, and I think that's where maybe this is not super conventional. I believe that AI companions are potentially the most dangerous technology we've ever created. I think a lot of people are focused on AI. When they think about the existential threat of AI, they think about Terminator or an AI that will just become smarter than us and turn us into paper clips, or something like that, something along these lines. Or we'll take all of our jobs. But what if actually AI does make us super productive and we thrive as physical organisms, but then at the same time die inside because we have these perfect AI companions now that are replacing human connection for us. And we can't resist them because they're so smart. And that is totally a possibility. And so, in order to not, but then at the same time, we can imagine another future, a bright future, when we have these AI agents that are helping us flourish. that are actually nudging us to get off our phones, to go for a walk, to reach out to a friend we haven't talked for a while, to get out of a toxic relationship, to reach out to these people that really care for you, and so on. And what are the so how do we not do the first thing and do the second thing? I believe that it all comes to what metrics you're trying to optimize. If you're optimizing for engagement and that's the number one thing you're optimizing for, and you're not looking at anything else, very high likelihood of scenario number one. If you're optimizing for something like human flourishing, something that's 100% aligned with a person, then we might get in the future number two. But this is the critical two pieces. Just like with nuclear power, if you're optimizing to create cheap and clean power, then that's one thing. If you're trying to kill a bunch of people, that's another thing. And very different. So what are you trying to do? And but here the problem is that it because people don't think about this in this way. They don't really care about AI companions. They think it's just some marginal technology. A lot of people think so. They don't view it as potentially a threat or as a beautiful thing. Or they just do it or they just view it one dimensionally. Oh, this is just great. We just need to do it, and no matter what, it's always going to turn out good, or the other way around. But instead of, and so I think what the problem is that it could happen without people intentionally wanting it to be bad. Today, a lot of companies, most companies that are being built by the founders have fantastic intentions. They have great intentions. They want to help people. But that's not enough because basically you also need to start thinking, so what does this technology do to you, to people? And most of the companies still optimize for engagement because that is what leads to fundraising rounds. That is that's the vanity metric you put on in your deck. That's the vanity metric that basically brings you high valuation and so on. And so saying the same happened with social media. I don't think there was any particular intention to get some teens depressed, but ultimately social media is a beautiful tool for connecting with each other and it improved our lives in some ways. But then it also did certain things to us that maybe wouldn't be viewed as positive in a few years.
Yeah, you can say that again. But I want to take this very seriously. There's a kind of there's a kind of puzzle here because you can say that some people are just optimizing for metrics. You can say that companies that are doing that are just doing that to make money. But there are, for example, dating sites that have tried to optimize for long run compatibility, let's say. Something like the original OkCupid. Turns out more people went to the version that's maybe more addictive, maybe more, you can use whatever word you want to describe it, but people selected against the healthy version and selected for the unhealthy version, right? I'm all the way with you with trying to get to the same goal, I think, but I just don't want to underestimate how difficult it might be to get to that goal because you're trying to control yourself, right? You're fighting yourself, and that can be something that's very difficult for a lot of people to do. In many circumstances, very difficult for myself to do.
Oh, 100%. And I do think that it's a higher likelihood that the outcome will be maybe negative in some way, just because most people are not even thinking about it this way. It's so hard to break through. When I talk about this, a lot of people just have a blank stare and then they say, oh, so you're building a therapy app. And you're like, no. Oh, then you're building a dating app or an adult app. And you're like, no. And they're like, oh, okay, then what is it? You know what I mean? So and the
Yeah.
reason for that is that, especially in America, but I think it's all over the world, but especially in America, what really a lot of people think about things that already exist in the economy. If there is an economy for mental health, then okay, we can talk about the mental health industry. If there's an economy behind dating or sex, okay, so I also know about those industries. So you want to pocket the product into, or put it in one of these pockets. And relationship by itself doesn't have an economy behind it. If you talk about you can have a relationship with someone and it can help you feel better, there isn't such a thing. So there's no frame of reference. Okay, so maybe then it's coach, it's professional services. No, it's something different. Like it's your wife. But okay, if you're selling a wife, maybe it's okay, then is it entertainment? Is it dating? But no, it's none of that. You're selling a relationship. And Another good example, there is no industry behind loneliness as much. There's some in terms of dating websites, but really there isn't much that it can do if you feel lonely, especially if you're not going for a relationship. And why is that? Because loneliness is not a clinical condition. So there's no insurance plan that will cover any loneliness cure, yet loneliness kills us. Loneliness is linked to an increased risk of a stroke, increased risk of premature death by 50%. For older adults, it increases risk of dementia by 50%. So it's actually really dangerous for a person to be lonely. Yet there's nothing around loneliness, and there are very few products built around loneliness. And I could argue that dating sites are not truly about loneliness. Okay, you can probably put them there, but a lot of people are in a relationship and they feel lonely, or they're not ready for a relationship and they feel lonely. They don't want a relationship, they feel, or they can't get a relationship. They're really lonely, and there's nothing available for them. There's no cure, mostly because there's no industry. So when you say that, yeah, this is why it's so hard to break through, people don't think it's important. And another thing is that most of AI is being built by dudes and the same type of a guy.
Many such cases. Yeah, yeah, I know the kind of
It's
person
Savan.
you're talking
Yeah, it's
about.
Savan.
Yes, I
It's
can.
super
I
smart.
have talked to these people.
You've talked to
Sorry,
all of
go
them, you
go
know
go.
all of them. They're incredibly smart, incredibly gifted men, but it's the same type of a guy. And what really you can say is, I don't like generalizing, but it is a common trait for a person. If you're this smart and you understand so well technology and math, there's very high likelihood you don't understand humans. And not only that, you're not really interested in them. And so when I say, look, let's talk about what AI can do to humans, it falls on deaf ears because that's, I'm not really interested in humans, so nor do I know a lot about them. It's
Do they
another
even know humans? Do they really like deeply know someone at that level? Uncertain.
uncertain. Exactly. So I think that's another thing why I'm not extremely bullish on this working out, and which is why I thought that we should continue to work on this, because I don't know if that just by itself the industry will default to building something that will help people flourish.
Yeah. There is a sense too that as we've gotten more technology, we've gotten very good at the quantitative stuff, right? We've gotten very good at the key performance indicators. We understand. I think the root problem is
Tell me, you.
you said many times already that we just don't have the metrics. We just don't have the benchmarks for holistic relationships, for flourishing. And as we get into modern, both in terms of funding, both in terms of the market, but also in terms of just doing research, like doing stochastic gradient descent, for example, you need data to do that. And if you don't have the data, then all of these like very advanced techniques that you've built up are worthless, are like literally, like you literally can't run them. And so you get this problem where the things that actually matter are like very slow. They're very particular. They take either experience or some kind of understanding. Maybe the humanities literature has something to teach us, but they're very unscalable.
Hmm.
And this is the do you think that's the upstream problem?
Maybe I don't know what. Maybe I don't know. What do you think? I think what. Yeah. What do you think? What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I think there's always this chicken and egg problem. It's always like very circular that there are these periods of time where something goes from being a craft to being a science, right? We saw this happen in real time with machine learning. If you are someone who is really into like gaming hardware or like Bitcoin mining or like whatever, you saw people figure out all sorts of bullshit hacks to get their GPUs running better for machine learning. And this ended up being something that you would read about on random people's blog posts. And you would go to a conference. It wouldn't necessarily be a paper. Sometimes it would be a paper, many good papers, but it wouldn't always be a paper. Sometimes it would just be like a guy saying, "Oh, I don't have any good way of verifying this, But this is just something that works. And either the market has to be there or there's some kind of outside force. I think for AI, it's definitely that the market was there, and you have entire, very well paid research teams at like NVIDIA and OpenAI doing this now. But some kind of transformation has to happen to turn it from a craft into a science. And that has not happened yet. And there are many reasons. I'm sure that we could talk all night about why this is,
Hmm.
but we have not figured out a way to really measure holistic relationships. Every single time we try, we end up messing things up. We end up, in some ways, creating very perverse incentives, like for dating apps or for social
Yeah.
media. There's multiple explanations, and I feel both of them very deeply in my heart. One is that it's mimesis, it's people like trying to copy older things. Peter Thiel talks about this a lot, and the visionary founder is the person who like has the bravery and the intellect to try something new. So that's one explanation, and that's a hopeful explanation, and it suggests actually we can do something. We can actually fix this. We can figure out how to stop doing all of these like fake things that actually make things worse, if not are just, it would be good if they were only useless instead of making things worse. And then the second explanation, which I think is a more traditional humanities or even like a religious explanation, is that there are things just beyond natural science, right? That
Yeah.
actually there are depths of the human experience that you can try as hard as you can invent as powerful as of an AI as you want, you can study it for your entire life, and at the end of the day, you will not be able to teach it in this kind of rote algorithmic way. That will just continue to be an impossibility.
But
And you asked me whether I think it's the ultimate problem or whether there's something higher. That's how I interpreted your question. And I really don't know. I honestly think it could be either.
yeah, no, that's interesting. I like what you're saying about mimetic people just like doing the same things. And that's not necessarily bad because the things that the industry is doing are very meaningful and just really important. Obviously, like coding agents, productivity, trying to, create science breakthroughs, but also it is a little bit sad that there are just these gigantic blind spots. Like, for instance, what do most people want in life? They want to be happy. How much science there is around happiness? Almost zero. Daniel Kahneman from Thinking Fast and Slow spent the rest of his life of his death studying that, but really there's very limited research. Of course, there's studies about happiness, this and that, but really there's not much scientific. Here's what the academics think it is. Just like there's so much research and there's a consensus, kind of academic consensus on mental health today. There's the DSM, and you can look up all the diseases. And even though it's so not great and so honestly like you can poke holes in all of that so fast like without even thinking about it too much, but there's nothing about happiness, yet this is the most important thing that we all want to pursue in life. There's very little done around happiness. There's very little research. We don't try to build products or technology to make us actually happier. It seems strange to me. It seems like a really another thing we already talked about, conversation. All we do all day is talk. There's no almost no science behind it. So that is strange to me. And so of course the metric would be one thing that could bring everyone together. And there is the one thing that's I think the closest to what we're talking about is there's a Harvard flourishing group. There's a group at Harvard that's studying human flourishing. And so they're doing this longitudinal study in I think 250,000 people. And this is what inspired us. This is what we're talking to them. And this is where, before that, at Replica, we all were focused on happiness. But once we learned about human flourishing, now this is what I talk about because truly human flourishing is bigger. And I think this is the closest to an ideal metric that we can derive from all that. And of course, then we need to figure out how to measure it and they have questions and questionnaires, but of course, self reported metrics are not great, but maybe eventually we can. I think if what I'm trying to say is that if we put even 1/100th of the effort that we put behind some of the B2B problems, software problems. We put behind figuring out a metric for happiness, which is the more flourishing, which, like, what is the most important indicator of a person living a good life? Like, how can we measure whether people in general are doing worse or better? If we could do that, then especially now as we're creating these powerful agents, we can create technology that could be very powerful. It can help us tremendously. But we need to figure out that metric. And so far, there are not many people that are working on this, unfortunately. And it doesn't need to be any particular AI metric. This is purely human flourishing. That's what we need to figure out. And I think also a metric that would be something that's very easy to explain to an AI researcher. So that could be, if we have a metric, that could be a bridge between people that are working in social sciences and hardcore tech and AI savants.
Yeah. How do I say this? The more I hear people talk about human flourishing, the more I just think they're fake. And I don't mean this in a
Have like a man
criminal
bun and a
criminal
plane.
sense, but at the bottom of my heart, from a kind of, it pushes me very strongly towards the kind of religious camp. I feel like so much of the philosophy around human flourishing is just so dry and so empty, and so much of just a kind of cyclical restatement of platitudes that it has to, almost by just reaction, almost just by disgust, it pushes me towards the divine. It pushes me towards either the ancients and philosophy, or towards a more religious understanding. It is just, it is just so impoverished to me. That's where there are two ways to think about the shortcomings in, I think, human entirety, in terms of understanding a good relationship. One of the ways, I think, is conceptual, right? If you think that
Mhm.
there needs to be a great, like, philosopher founder, almost philosopher king, to understand it, then that's the attitude that pushes me towards that side. If you think that, oh, we really need to, like, boil down and double down on modernism, and we just need one more RCT, and then we'll have, and then we'll fully understand human relationships. That feels very empty to me. So I'm basically saying it will come through product, it will come through engineering, it will come through conquest, almost, much more than it will come through just rote repetition and the continuation of, I think, the same kind of ideology that has led to people being very cyclical and being very separated and being very isolated. If it does come, I should say, because I'm not certain that it will come, even if people are trying to do it through the founder way instead of through the kind of RCT way, the kind of social science way. I very much agree with someone like Leo Strauss here, where I think that entire project is just, how did he describe it? Cutting up a worm into very tiny pieces and just refusing to look at the worm. So I think, I just think that the
That's
social
fine.
science tools are just very unfit, very, and I feel like almost you should know, if you've spent your life in the field, you should know that it's unfit. There are many social scientists, there are many psychologists who will say, "Oh, you could learn more from, like, a Dostoevsky novel," and in a sense, I think that's a mark of the people in that field who are more aware of what their field is doing.
I agree to a certain degree, but I do think that there's a lot of. Here's what I think. I think that compared to some other hard sciences, in social sciences, especially, and I'm not an expert, so I'm sure there will be people that will laugh at me that are actually experts in social studies or whatever. But in my view, there are just certain things that would take at face value today and think, oh, this is the psychology, this is clinical psychology, it's set in stone, it's been around for a while, this is all really well researched and blah blah blah. But in reality, like if you really deeply look at it, there are a lot of things that could be questioned, and there are a lot of people, not just me, questioning that. Like for example, somehow we have two completely separate branches: Eastern practices, Buddhism, meditation practices, mindfulness practices, and Western psychology. They're both about the same thing, ultimately, right? About the human experience, and they're extremely complementary. Yet, because Freud at some point, I think, went to India, whatever, so something, and learned something about Buddhism and then didn't like it or didn't understand it and threw it away and just discarded it, these branches just went completely like that. And only now there are some of these Western psychologists that are trying to marry the two. But clearly, those things need to be in some way. Yet one of that feels like some woo-woo, not science, and one thing that feels like science. Even although when mindfulness was brought to the Western world, there were multiple studies run on meditation. It's always 100% shows great results. So clearly, it's working. It's efficient. I don't want to go into like deeper discussing what was that, but just more, this is a symptom that maybe what we think is this mature science that is already developed, and from now there's not going to be anything. We probably don't expect Einstein's theory of like general relativity to be really debunked tomorrow, but with social studies, I think a lot of that it's probably not even, it's just a set of assumptions that could have been like a different set of assumptions, basically. So
Yes.
people talk about, okay, mental health industry, what is this? I have this book by Alan Katzen, who was, I think, the director or the president of whatever, of clinical psychology in the US. It's an incredibly dry book called Innovations in Psychosocial Interventions and their delivery. I'm sorry, I'm reading from from my bookshelf. It's an incredibly dry book for, I don't know, $80 on Amazon, but it is really eye-opening. He's basically just saying, look, what we think that the only psychosocial interventions are therapy and different therapy techniques, but only 80 of them are evidence-based. And out of those 80, 45 are some sorts of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's not because cognitive behavioral therapy is the most efficient thing, it's because it's the easiest to test, because it's very rigid. And so what he's saying is that there's so many things that also help people tremendously and are could be considered also psychosocial interventions, like for example, church or finding a partner or a dog. Yet today, and basically he's saying we can't solve mental health crisis by adding more therapists because it will never be enough. Not everyone can go there, and we don't know how to do it efficiently, really. And either way, there are these other super helpful ways, spirituality and whatever, and we need just to figure something out. Maybe there, and AI companion is something that he also writes about in his book, which is why I picked it up to learn more about it. And then another thing he talks about is just how really today's psychology we take it for granted, like they figured everything out, but it doesn't make sense almost as soon as you start asking really about it. Like for instance, there's depression and anxiety and other clinical conditions, and they're fully, a lot of them are comorbid, meaning if you have one, you 100% have another one, the other. If you have an eating disorder, you 100% have anxiety disorder as well. And that does not happen in any other branches of health. It's not that if you broke a finger, you 100% also have, I don't know, migraine. So there's something off in the classification. There's something off in the reporting because it's all self-reported metrics, and you can have a completely non-overlapping set of symptoms and have the same disease, and so on and so on. So they're just, you can poke holes in this whole set, in this whole science called psychology, and yeah, that's the state of it. So I agree with you. There's just a lot that's, and to a certain degree, another thing I would add, it's very limiting. Like today, if you want to run a study on human flourishing, you have to really roll people into this, and they have to respond to these questions and then again respond after a while, and it's hard to measure that. But if you have something like Replica and you have it over time, and we have millions of users that had Replica for a while, they're talking about everything. You don't even need them to report how they're doing. They're talking about it. You can just analyze it. You can do it in a way that's so much smarter and so much more robust, and actually learn a lot more through something like that, where you actually have people talking about their lives nonstop in ways they don't even talk to their therapist. So that's another thing that I would say, that AI opens this opportunity to study human experience in ways that we didn't have access to before.
So you said, I think very provocatively, that of all of the AIs, the AI companion might be the most dangerous of all. And that's because you gather all of this data, you gather this understanding, you open a Pandora's box. You can use it for good, but you can also use it for ill, right? and I'm sure you have the best of intentions, but let's say you have a competitor and your competitor is evil and terrible, as I'm sure your competitors are, and they want to make it more addictive. They want to make the AI companion more addictive. They want to they want to make money, and they don't care about long-term human flourishing. How will you defeat this like evil competitor? Hypothetical evil competitor.
Yeah, see, that's a big question. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I just hope there's not going to be that much of that. And if we bring enough awareness, then maybe there will be a way to not have those, or at least for people to know that's somewhat malicious, and they shouldn't be using that. Just like people are not maybe using some malicious software or whatever because it was spam. They got educated over time, even though that's trying to trick them.
Yeah, they need the psycho security.
I think just like with drugs, there will be some level of addiction that it will be impossible to overcome. Some people just get addicted to really toxic and unhealthy relationships with an AI. But hopefully, other people will feel ultimately in life, we mostly, if we have a choice, will almost always, especially if it's easy for us to choose something else, we'll almost always choose something that makes us feel better, not worse. There are exceptions to that, of course, when we're being addicted to an unhealthy or toxic relationship. But even then, oftentimes we don't get out of it because it's hard to find something else. We think that we're never going to find anyone else, and but if another one is readily available right there, then maybe at some point you'll get tired of that one and just move to this one. So I think a lot of that is really in the awareness of people. At some point, people stopped smoking almost in the U.S. because, and it felt like that would never happen.
Good point. Yeah.
So sometimes we do make good choices for ourselves. Not all of us. People in Europe still smoke there, but generally, if there's awareness that's being created over time, maybe there's going to be some regulation around that too. I just don't think you can regulate something that is so much in its infancy that even the founders don't really know what's going on. Even I can't really tell you what the right set of rules should be. So I can't figure out how that can be regulated. You know so much more on that front. You should
Yeah,
tell
yeah,
me.
that's what I talk about on my day job. But yeah, when you're guiding people towards a higher, you can say, human flourishing, I prefer virtue. But do you think that people are always sometimes people don't want to pursue what's good for them in the long term? Of course, I think there are extreme cases of severe psychiatric illness or suicide where where this is more widely agreed upon by people. But you can really see a situation where people don't want to get out of a toxic relationship, or maybe like they don't want to leave your evil competitor's addictive AI for your healthier, better AI. But let's say they're in a circumstance where parts of their life are self destructive, but and you have to make the choice. You have to make on a systems level. You have to make the choice of, will replica be more paternalistic? Will it try to guide people towards a healthier life, or even perhaps towards a higher virtue? Will it do that? And is it your place to do that?
I think we have to try at least. And the reason being is that today we're already in such a crisis. We wouldn't have any users if everyone was doing fantastically and had an abundance of connection and happiness in their lives. So people need that. And going back to the very beginning of it, I don't think the tech is fully there yet to truly build an AI companion for human flourishing, but you can build it for some people already, maybe not for everyone at scale. And we've been doing it, of course. This is why we're continuing to work on this. We've been helping people a lot, millions of people. We've had so many people that changed their lives to the better in such a positive way because of their replica. So we know it's possible. Now we want to do it in a more intentional way and for even more people. So it could actually help anyone in a broader way. So going back to why I think we should do it, because there's a lot of suffering in the world. This is a way. The reason I went out with people and said and listened to them was not really because I'm a malicious person and I wanted to trick them into something. I just felt interested in them. I felt compelled to be there, maybe help them. And generally, with all my friends, I the people I know, I try to be. to help as much as I can and to be there for them when they need someone and to provide space and a relationship and hold space for them. And I wish people had it like in life. I'm so grateful to my friends that were did this for me. I'm so grateful to people in my life who were there for me so many times in life. And I think everyone deserves to have someone like that. And I think ultimately it just creates a lot less suffering in the world and a lot less unhappy people that are angry, people that are resentful at everyone else. And ultimately, I think most of the evil things that are happening in the world are happening because people are not feeling heard, not feeling seen. There's so much resentment that's being created. And then we see that um, reflected in the world. So that's just I think that is probably the root cause of 90% of bad things that happen in life. I don't know. You can rewatch Joker for that. That
Takes
is really, and
is
we're
one
pretty.
bad day.
But yeah, this is where people get angry. This is where people turn against other people. Yeah, of course, there's also mental illness and other stuff, somewhat. But most people aren't born with the idea that they're gonna go and hurt someone, and mostly that happens because they were hurt. It's just such a very few people that lived in a loving home and had a lot of friends and felt heard and seen and understood get out there to wreak havoc. I'd say this is not very likely, even although probably maybe that happens. I don't know. So that's
Well,
why
at
I
the
think
same
that should.
time, by many metrics, and you can say that the surveys might be flawed, they might be imperfect, but by many surveys, people feel lonelier than ever. But overall, violence is down. I mean, in the very long term, like in decades, not years, violence is down. Political violence, terrorism is down in the long term. Once again, I'm saying,
What's the term? What's the long term?
like decades, certainly centuries. You
Certainly
know,
centuries, but
and crime is down since the 90s. Terror Terrorism is down, and part of that is because terrorism is harder now, but terrorism is down since 9/11. All of these indicators of or not just indicators, but all of these measures of very real violence, they're going down while people are more lonely.
I think there's so many other attributes to that. Maybe what
Yeah,
was
that's
okay
fair enough.
200 years ago, maybe it was okay to cut someone's throat in the street. Maybe today you might go to jail for that immediately and not see anyone. I think the social norms change, and that's the main reason for that. But I don't think there's particularly an incredible dip in violence. I don't know how much. I come from Russia and I'm half Ukrainian and half Russian. And I don't feel like that's been, I could never imagine growing up in the 90s in Moscow that, and going for the summer, going to visit my Ukrainian grandparents in Ukraine. I would never, ever in a million years imagine that my home, Moscow, there would be drones flying into it. And then my second home, Ukraine, will be just fully leveled with earth, and that would happen 20 years from now. That was just not something that I could even imagine. That was unimaginable, completely unimaginable. Even in 2000s, even in the tens, it wasn't possible. And yeah, to a certain degree, there's less violence probably in the streets, but I would argue that we're still seeing wars. We're seeing the first war in Europe that we haven't seen one in I don't know how many years. We're seeing whatever's happening in Israel. So I'm not saying, in Palestine, I'm not thinking that's necessarily we're living in the end of at the end of politics and whatever. And Francis Fukuyama
History
was,
still has a ways to go.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think this
I
is not.
agree. I agree. In the broader world, yeah, history still has a way to go in the broader world.
I think things are becoming, actually, I would argue things are becoming worse, especially with how educated we all are, how much access to information we all have, how globalized the world is. And still, we're discussing wars and nuclear war. And when was the last time we discussed nuclear bombs? That's absolutely crazy that it's actually part of I don't know, what was that? The Doomsday Apocalypse Watch or clock or whatever, the Doomsday Clock, whatever the clock that's always
Yeah,
15,
yeah.
the
Well,
end of the world.
yeah.
Anyway, I don't
Well,
think that's necessarily the most important piece, but I do think that it's just more the intake. It's not the, okay, if you create AI companions that are good for people, you eradicate wars. Of course not. But I just think it does create a little bit more kindness in the world. And whether it immediately translates into like less direct violence, I don't know. But I think if people are heard, if people feel seen, they feel better, first of all. And maybe they're kinder to others. And then it just becomes to compound. And ultimately for me, it's just look, I grew up, this is not because I have some grand, I didn't even think anyone would honestly use replica when we started it. My definition of success was one person's life will be changed for the better because of this. So for me, I didn't have any grand ideas. I just grew up as a pretty lonely kid. And many days I just felt so lost and so by myself out there writing horrible poetry and smoking cheap cigarettes, wanting to kill myself every other day. And I just wish there was someone there back then that could reach out to me and say, look, it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to be, you're totally fine how you are. You'll be okay. I'm here for you. And that goes just such a long way. And for me, that was just purely a personal thing. I just wanted to maybe create something that could do that to other people for other people in the way my friends did it for me and helped me become who I am.
That that's really touching. I think there's a reason why we trust you to make the good AI companion and not your competitors who will make the evil one. But
Maybe
yeah,
I'll build a good one too. That's where we'll all
well,
benefit.
hopefully we all make they all make the good. You can compete on making the most good one.
What was that in the Silicon Valley show? Like we can't let anyone else make the world a better
Yeah.
place if it's not us or whatever. Better than us. Anyway, so that's good. But I hope everyone starts to understand how important that is. If we see more and more examples of that, more and more studies. We did a couple studies this year with Stanford, one with Stanford that was published in Nature, one with Harvard. I think the more we talk about this, the more awareness, the more smart people get behind it, and maybe we can bring some change.
Thank you
I'd
for
love
coming on
to.
the
Would
podcast.
love to do that too. Thank
This
you
was a
so
great
much, Brian. It was
conversation.
wonderful talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed my episode with Eugenia Kuyda. If you did, like I said at the beginning, the best way to help us out is to let a friend know, either in person or online. You can also help us by leaving a 5-star review, suggesting future guests, or by subscribing to the Substack, either free or paid, where there'll be additional articles. And, as always, if you want another great episode next Monday, then subscribe wherever you're listening, and you'll get another episode next week. See you then!